Hey everyone, Ariel Adams here with the Superlative podcast. Please listen to aBlogtoWatch's other show, aBlogtoWatch Weekly, where we talk about the latest watch news and reviews. Today on Superlative, my guest is Theodore de Turckheim. He is the current Chief Marketing Officer of an interesting brand called Micromilspec. I was going to say interesting little brand Micromilspec because micro's in there. But you are a little brand. But anyways, Theodore, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And thank you for actually pronouncing my family name correctly. It's one of the hardest things for someone who speaks English to try and pronounce, as it's French. I've heard Turckheim, Turkenstein. So thank you for getting it correct.
That has letters that aren't even in the word.
I know. I think the worst was my brother. His own bank. His name is Ronan de Turckheim, and his own bank once sent him a letter for Roger the Merckheim, and like nothing was correct. He's like, I'm a client at the bank. And they have me as Roger the Merckheim.
I've had it bad myself with my name. I don't even want to rant on that, so I'm just not going to. But I'm pleased that I got the name right. I was going to say, small brands are the big thing today, aren't they?
It seems like it. I think it depends on where you're based in the world. So like in some traditional, I would say like in some traditional markets, like if I take Europe as an example, I think Spain is not jumping onto the independent small micro brands like maybe France is, but at the same time, France has many small independent brands or even ones who have made it to becoming an established brand like Baltic. So I think there's a lot more awareness and visibility to having that accessibility and knowledge across all of these different micro brands. And they have watch salons that follow it.
I think what's interesting is that the entrepreneur or the proprietor at a small brand, I don't like the word micro brand, but that's used a lot. That's not why micro's in, I think, your brand's name, but that's another thing that we'll get to. And so I think that there's one type of person who wants to stay small and another type of person who's like, no, the goal is to grow. And, yes, they can play in the same field for a while, but don't you agree that's sort of a fundamentally different approach?
Yes, I do. I mean, 100%. I think when you look at our path, people might think that we're small in terms of ambitions and where we've started from in terms of our history, because it's only, we're a 5-year-old business company that has been specializing in doing watches just for either private individuals or companies or military squadrons. And in the last 12 months, we've been selling to the public. And, it's been quite an interesting projection now that we've switched our business model to this, because I think we've been blown away by all the support and we're slowly growing into a bigger brand. And I think, adopting that change in the last 12 months has been something really positive, because what in our position might have kept us in our category as a small little independent brand that maybe not that many people know about. I think now we've had a rocket tied to our backside, and we're slowly riding this wave for as long as we can, and we have really strong ambitions to become a huge brand as well.
Now, you said that you were shocked about a certain level of success when you shifted the business model from selling to, as I understand, military squadrons to private individuals. What exactly was shocking?
You know what? A little bit of everything, in the sense that I remember when Henrik, the CEO, showed me the image of the watch that he was going to release, being Geneva Watch Days. The Milgraph at Geneva Watch Days. I remember in the back of my head, I was like, "Oof, I don't think this is going to work." But to be fair, every time Henrik has showed me an image of a watch, I was like, "Oof, I don't think this is going to work." And after every time, it ends up working really, really well, and the reception of it. And I think it's because I'm maybe a little bit used to the Richemont way of thinking, where I would say the products that they released are quite repetitive. It's either smaller case sizes, but it tends to be always the same colors, spinning off the same collections that they've done, historically speaking, like recently reissuing the Ingénieur. So when we're, in our case, where we have the ability to not have that burden of heritage, and Henrik is able to create these interesting timepieces, I'm always surprised by the fact that people just get it in terms of understand why the Milgraph has been designed in the way it has, with the crown on the opposite side, with it being titanium grade 5. People have just gotten it. So I think, underestimated the desire for something new. They're also the educated collector, how actually in tune they were with these types of small, minimal designs that they would spot. And also surprised by the press, who really turned up and supported us, just because of the product in itself and the kind of brand DNA that we had, which, once again, I didn't expect people to, gravitate so much towards us because of that.
You bring up an interesting point where even though you're at the company and you want success, when the designer introduces something fresh to you, you don't really know what to make of it, right? Like, you liking it, not liking it, that's of course an important decision, but you ultimately have no idea how well it'll do. And you hinted at sort of the Richemont way, which is maybe some type of redundancy or conservatism or at least safety in the product creation process. The designer would come to you with something I'm hoping was original, right? If you design watches, you should know watches, and you don't really copy others. You try to come up with something fresh, and you're like, oh, this is new, and maybe you thought weird. Maybe people won't like it. It's a natural reaction, but don't you agree that we just need to follow the whims of those artists and support them and nurture them? Because none of these good designs would ever come as a result of a committee decision, right?
100%. Except in our case, none of what's interesting in our case is that no one in our company comes from a watch background. So when every time someone's designing a watch, that person's actually, he's quite new to the watch world. So every time there's a new release, I'm like, what do you know about designing watches? You were a tech entrepreneur in LA, in terms of, because Henrik used to live in LA and he's had a food supplements company, I think, over there. And I was like, a couple of years ago, you're a food supplements tech bro in California, and now you're designing watches. But he's always been spot on it. So I have to eat my humble pie consistently at every single release, because so far he's hit a home run with every single watch that he's done. So I need to learn how to just take a back seat, know what I'm good at, which is just creating fun campaigns, and, appreciate that he's actually really good at designing watches himself.
Now, your background, you worked at Richemont. You want to talk a little bit about some of the experience you had there?
Yeah, sure. I joined IWC in 2018. Historically, I used to work in hospitality as well. And when I first joined, I ended up applying originally for a job as CRM executive. And what was funny was the lady who was hiring me was a friend of my brother's, and she sat me down and she was like, Theo, I'm pretty sure you're quite useless on data. So we're going to halt your CRM application. You're going to go home and you're going to rewrite your entire CV, and you're going to apply for the PR assistant role, because I think that's going to be more suited to your qualities. So I ended up having to reapply for the job specializing in PR. And eventually when I got in, it ended up being a wild ride, because it's my job started just off as PR and events manager. And little by little, I was able to get more responsibility by adding other, feathers to my cap, like taking care of partnerships for the whole local market. I redesigned part of the new Bond Street boutique. So, and I also got put in charge of sustainability for the local market and turned it into one of the best practices across the entire IWC market. And, little by little, I kept growing and growing and growing, but I put that down entirely down to, I had two incredible ladies who managed me perfectly, who understood exactly what I was good at, exactly what I was terrible at, and did whatever they could to cover my weaknesses in front of other people's in the office. And they really protected me from maybe other pressures that might have come, whether it was from Richemont, because I'm quite a creative person. So sometimes I can be a bit disruptive. So they would often protect me from that. But if ever there was an idea that they felt it was good enough for someone to take notice, then they were always the first one to put me in front of the CEO to pitch my idea and to try and get it across the line.
It's funny when you say that story about those women who protected you. I recognize that at most watch brands, there's sort of one or more, and they're often women, that like protect certain people from the bureaucracy, from the corporate, coldness. If they don't exist, it's hard, but they are these sort of enablers that help you navigate the system, that sort of figure it out. And there's a lot of them. A lot of brands have them, and they can make a very challenging situation a lot more manageable. I'm really glad that you had encounters with those people. Why is a place like Richemont, which seems to be able to do certain things right, why is it difficult to be a creative there? And is there an understanding at some level that these are, at least in theory, supposed to be creative brands?
They are supposed to be creative brands, because if they've been around this long, they've been doing some correct decisions along the way, and they've been doing some things along those lines that have been quite disruptive and interesting. Even when, in my time at IWC, I felt, I always joked saying when IWC takes LSD and a bit of ecstasy, they do really good watches.
I like that.
The Pantone collection, the Top Gun Pantone collection, I thought, personally, I resonated with it. I thought that was quite interesting. You could attract a different audience with the younger generation. And I thought that was cool. The Seratanium watch, I think they were the first ones to create the Seratanium. I know, I think it was Tag or another brand did a variation of it called Serenium a couple of years later. But, all those little side quests that they've been doing, I find that interesting. But the difficulty of Richemont is because they have all this history. Fundamentally, I was a 32-year-old kid at the time. What the hell do I know? In the sense of they're just like, shut up, sit down. Let the old guards, manage this. We've been doing a great job for 150 years. So we don't need a 32-year-old start yapping around with all these ideas. But I think that's where I was, once again quite lucky, because with the sense of my boss, my two lady bosses, they kind of gave me free will. So when I said my job started as PR and events, they came up to me and they included something in my CV called special projects. And special projects was just, it could be anything. It was anything that I had an idea of that I felt could drastically change our local market. And that's how sustainability, partnerships, and all these other things fell underneath it. I think that was the fun part of it. They taught me how to embrace my creative side, which now I'm able to apply to Micromilspec.
I appreciate you discussing that. I think it's a very important thing to discuss. I think that I lament the fact that a lot of people who are creatives, whether it's creatives with ideas or design creatives or marketing creatives or whatnot, they struggle in that environment. Often they leave. And it's not just IWC or Richemont. It's all the big corporate groups. They're mostly very hostile to the creative forces. They're not open to new ideas. You need a lot of consensus. And I think that's a shame, because I think that a lot of the small brand community would not have to exist if the bigger brands were simply more welcoming to the creative forces. You know what I mean?
100%. And I think, as well, in my case, I think the reason why I left there as well might have been different from others. It wasn't because of being held down from creative ability, because I had the opportunity to, embrace that with my bosses. But I always swore to myself and to my managers and told them, I never want your job. So the day that you go, I go. And one of them resigned in July. And then the other one, without knowing, we resigned the same day, because I had the feeling she was going to resign.
Oh, wow.
And then, so we technically both resigned the same day. And then I was like, okay, I had 6 years. It was an incredible time, but I'm not interested in knowing what the next chapter looks like without these two ladies here.
I totally get that. I totally get. Who was the CEO of IWC when you began working there?
For me, it's always been Chris Granger-Herr.
Okay, that's around when he started, right?
Yes, I think I think he might have started 6 months before or something like that.
Okay. So you've only been there through one. Obviously, that was very close to the George Kern era.
Yes.
He must have left a huge mark on there. He's a big personality. When he did not exactly just leave, he left all of Richemont, not super good terms. What can you say about what some of the stories were about his legacy or memory?
You know what? The only story that I know about George Kern was one that my brother told me, because my brother used to work as the head of buying at Mr. Porter for the watch division. So often what he used to do is he had to go around and see all the CEOs. I think it was right after, or right before, or right after Watches of Wonders to discuss what products would go online at Mr. Porter. And the one person he always found quite interesting to meet was Mr. George Kern, because he every time he turned up at Breitling, he would sit down in a room, and after something would be off, George would then change the room, go into another room. Actually, no, this room's too cold, so they went into another room. And after, oh, this room, no, I don't like this table, so went into another room, and all of this. And my brother's like, we've changed room about 8 to 9 to 12 times for no reason. I think it was just like a power move of trying to disrupt me and bringing me into different environments. Um, but in the end, he was like, "This guy is just a bit of a. It's just a bit weird, you know. Why would you do that?" But on the other side of it, I think when you look at what he's done from a business perspective, I think he's copy pasted his DNA or what he did at IWC and integrated that at Breitling, um, which is a strategy I think that worked. I think, you know, if you see what he's done with Breitling, it's been a decent success compared to where they were historically speaking in the last 10 years. But I think it's something that eventually you need to modernize your approach, because for him, at least from my perspective, it's always the same thing. Get a celebrity, put a watch on, do a new logo, make your watches more colorful and slightly, you know, younger orientated, release, and then do lots of releases throughout the entire year. Um, and I think that's his recipe. So I think he becomes quite predictable in knowing what he's going to do. So for all the other brands that are around him, I think it's easy for them to, you know, keep Breitling in their lane, because they're not really doing anything revolutionary in the last couple of years. But I think for IWC's sake, when he left, there was a huge void, because as I mentioned with my brother, um, he's someone who's quite authoritarian. So he's someone who's very good at getting 10,000 people all pulling in the same direction. Is he going to ruffle feathers along the way? Yes. Is he going to upset people, be, you know, terrible with others? Yes. But everyone's pulling in the same direction. And that's not what it felt sometimes at IWC.
So Chris's job was interesting. Chris has an interesting background, and being a designer is part of that. And I always found this interesting, I don't want to call it conflict, but I think it was a bit of an issue, where he's someone that is a designer, but he can't really make new things. So it's like designed around the same silhouette. He's like, oh. And I think he had a lot of fun with the Ingenieur, because he got to do something which is a rare project, where there's this original Gerald Genta design that never really worked in execution. It was like a pretty picture, but it didn't really look good when you made it. And so what was it, like 6 years you guys spent like trying to make the Ingenieur pretty watch? And it's very successful now. You know, I think IWC does very, very well with that. It's a pretty watch. And I don't know who'll ever really get the credit for that, right? Like, he made the unwearable Genta a reality, and he did a good job. And you might like the Ingenieur or not, but I think that's the one time he actually got to build something and be creative, right?
100%. And I think the Ingenieur was quite an interesting one, because the product in itself is successful. The launch was extremely complicated because I forget the name of the wife of Gerald Genta.
Evelyn.
Evelyn, thank you. So we had a deal with Evelyn to, you know, relaunch the Ingenieur together. And the day that we launched it at Watches of Wonders, Louis Vuitton, I think it was, announced a deal with her. So suddenly it totally took all the shine away from the Ingenieur at that Watches of Wonders moment, because everyone was talking about the fact that Evelyn switched on the day of our launch to another brand. And she was in our booth at the time of the launch. And she just looked up at everyone and just went, "I'm so sorry," and then went off. So it was very difficult to then, when you have the press coming around and be like, "So, not really interested in the Ingenieur. What the hell happened with Evelyn?" And you're like, "Oh, God, Jesus, how am I going to spin this stuff?" So I think, you know, it's been a success a couple of years later, because I think the dust has been able to settle on that. But at the time, my goodness, it was a chaotic storm of just, I can't even describe what the atmosphere was like in that booth for the entire watch that I wanted.
I think what's funny is that from a practical business perspective, none of that should matter, right? The product is nice. Her
100%.
endorsement support is more or less irrelevant, but the community, the personalities thrive in the soap opera nature of alliances and who's with who and all that. And it really has nothing to do. The watch is obviously a fresh thing. It's going to take a couple years for people to learn about it. Eventually it'll be more familiar and people will buy it. And it's just sort of the lifespan. But this sort of like everything having to be an instant success, I feel that really originated in this sort of corporate dominated time. Why is that? What are the rewards when something appears to be a super big success at a place like Richemont as opposed to a modest reception?
I think so. I mean, I can put you inside the mindset of what happens at Richemont. I think the reason why everyone wants everything to be consistently instant success is what I've said to. It's what I kept saying to my two lady bosses at IWC at the time. Is very hard, or at least from my perspective, I might be wrong. Is for me, I find it very hard to create a tangible, long-term marketing plan and building your brand DNA up based off 12 months visibility. What I mean by that is we're consistently working towards a financial year. We have no idea what we're launching the following year. So we have no idea how we can create a connection between like Pilot or Portofino or Portuguesa from one year to another. And in the case of IWC, I used the example of we're like a leopard that changes spots. You know, if you don't know us, you know, one year we have Tom Cruise jumping out of a plane in a Top Gun or whatever, and then suddenly you're in the Mediterranean on a 16-foot yacht or like a 30-meter yacht with crew serving you a cocktail. What's the connection? You need to be able to build these connections up through brand stories and educating the audience. But I think Richemont is a group that is under constant pressure because apart from Cartier, and I think Vacheron's doing a little bit better, is doing pretty well. A lot of the other brands just don't pour the same weight of what they're supposed to. So I think there is a constant fear of having what all the journalists call the blue suits rocking up, at the HQ, waving their fingers for, being like, well, why hasn't this, been a better year than what it has been? And those blue suits turn up way more than you think throughout the entire year when suddenly something has had a modest reception. You don't have the time to, fundamentally, I've seen people go just like that because of a modest reception. It's not what they expect. They expect everything to be a constant success at an incredibly fast pace, which is just not possible.
Yeah. I think that's a very important point to make. And I've mentioned it many, many times in this show and many conversations where when the watch industry says it's in it for the long term, managers have to take that seriously. It is not a 12-month outlook. It is a 5 to 10 year outlook for most minor decisions. You have 100%. To give things time. The public needs time to learn about things, accept things, discover things, buy things. Models take time to develop. The idea that you need to show some type of performance increments on a 12-month cycle with what is expected in this industry makes no sense. And I'll say even further that long-term vision to me also means that you ignore blips in the market. Market goes down, just keep doing the same thing. Market goes up a little bit, ignore it. Just keep doing the same thing. And that is, I think, wisdom that we've seen a lot of the very successful brands do. Even Rolex is guilty of trying to be too agile and moving. But the Rolex we love is the Rolex that does not respond to market fluctuations, right? And I think that hopefully it's not, but maybe it's fundamentally incompatible with the idea of how these corporate groups want to run and how these luxury brands, watch brands are among them, need to operate with strong creatives at the helm who get to make whatever decisions they want to do, who don't have to justify everything, and giving time for ideas to materialize. These, I always like to remind folks, like classics, going back to Gerald Genta. the Royal Oak. That was not an instant success. That took like a quarter century to get popular. Okay. All the watches that today the industry celebrates never would have been successful under today's regime. The Submariner came out in the early 50s. Would it take like 50 years before it became a popular luxury item? 50 years. Okay. Like there is no instant hits or success. And these financial minds who think they're doing their shareholders a service by holding all these creatives on a short leash really aren't doing anybody any good. And it just results in high turnover or like people who work there that are like successful corporate goons. And some of them are sweet, but at the end of the day, they have to end up being a corporate goon. And, I don't know. Does that make good watches?
Not at all. Honestly, not at all. I think that's the sad part a little bit is, but I think, I think Switzerland as a whole is most of the time a corporate goon. We always joke in my family, living in London that, London's, we say America's like 2020, London's 2010, France is 1960. And then when you go to Switzerland, it's 1920. And, you slowly go back in time the more you go eastwards. And I find it very much to be true because that corporate culture in Switzerland is still very old fashioned in the way they work with marketing, the way they, work with creativity, the way they interact with other employees. I think that if people spend a bit of time researching the amount of horror stories you hear from an HR perspective coming out of Switzerland, kind of for me explains, the whole dynamic of the watch industry as well, because those people are based there. And I think that's what's been quite refreshing, in our case of working with a Norwegian company. I think in the interesting case of these guys is I watched a documentary recently, Is Norway Too Rich? And in there, it was saying, Norwegian people could be perceived being lazy because they know that they always have the oil money that will protect them and their family. So they tend to have incredibly high debt. So therefore, most of the time, they just sit back and don't really do much. And I was like, you know what? I'd much rather deal with the oil-rich Norwegian guy who doesn't really do much than, the hashtag #MeToo person dealing out of Switzerland who hasn't, done much. And is being a corporate bully to everyone. Because even in my time at Richemont, I saw bullying when I was there as well, even within my own department. And it's still very much present. And I think is what's creating that stifled atmosphere, not just from a product release, but also in an atmosphere as well.
Movado has been making watches for well over 100 years. It all started in 1881 in La Chaux-de-Fonds, Switzerland. At the beginning of the 20th century, Movado started producing hundreds of wristwatch models, while other companies were still focused on pocket watches. Early watch designs often eschewed round cases for alternative shapes. Square-shaped wristwatches were an immediate hit with consumers from the very beginning. As early as 1917, Movado was releasing square watches at the outset of the Art Deco era just before the Roaring '20s. Today, Movado honors that legacy with the new Heritage 1917 collection of men's and women's timepieces drawn directly from the authentic 1917 design. The Movado Heritage 1917 family of wristwatches features a variety of styles, including automatic mechanical movements in all of the 35mm wide versions. Inspired by the past, but faithful to modern expectations, the 1917 watches feature classic, legible dials, modest wearing proportions, and are available in a men's 35mm wide size and a women's 25mm wide size, as well as a choice of bracelet or strap attachment options. Designed with all wearers in mind, the Heritage 1917 is nevertheless an enthusiast product, featuring design excellence and Swiss-made mechanisms. Check out the Movado Heritage 1917 watches at department stores, select jewelers, or online at movado.com.
Thank you. It's such an interesting discussion about that. Now, moving on to Micromilspec, why does a military squadron need or want a watch? This is not a common niche, but this is not the only brand to do that. These squadrons seem to love their timepieces. Why is that?
It's exactly that. I mean, you nailed it on the head. One of our founders is actually part of the Norwegian Special Forces. And the reason why he founded the company is he really likes his watches. I mean, that was the main reason. And his biggest difficulty was finding a watch company who could help him create a model that he actually wanted to wear, not just for himself, but for his squadron. But what he came to find was either it was too expensive when you were approaching some of the brands, either they were not interested and just didn't listen to you, or if they did, they would impose a model on you. So I like using this was as an example, but there's a squadron in France called Les Nageurs de Combat, which is quite a famous squadron watch because it's one that Omega did, and then Blancpain did one for them, Tudor did one for them. But in the case, and now we do it for them. But in the case of Les Nageurs de Combat, they were always imposed a model. So Omega imposed the Seamaster as the design of what the squadron had to use. Tudor imposed, I think it's called the Pegasus,
Pelagos.
Pelagos, sorry. Yes, there you go. Thank you. The Pelagos, which, once again, didn't have much creativity. Blancpain also imposed the model. And in our case, they had total free will to do whatever the hell they wanted. So, and I think when they have that, then they start enjoying the process far more, and they even get even more into watches than what they originally thought. Because in their case, they needed a watch for their daily missions as their divers, based out in Corsica fighting human trafficking and drug smuggling. So for them, it was a tool watch that they actually had to use within their squadron, but they wanted something aesthetically that they enjoyed. And I think that's what's, is the bread and butter of our business. Is not only do they enjoy the watches, but they want to be part of the design of it. And very few companies can offer that to them today.
Is there a place where people can go and see this? Because if I understand you correctly, your company was making more or less bespoke watches where fresh parts and things like that for these squadrons. Whatever design they chose is obviously reflective of their culture, which is probably very interesting to observe. Is there a place where people can view these watches?
So they can only see the declassified versions because those are the ones. We've done over 49 projects with different squadrons, but we've declassified 6 of them on our website, which people can go on at micromilspec.com. And within that, you'll see there's the offshore. You've got the smoke jumper for the Canadian firefighters. You've got the Hercules for the Norwegian Hercules pilots. You've got the US Space Force, which is kind of like a team watch, a bit like in Formula One, where everyone is wearing the same watch. You have the Nageurs de Combat, which I'd mentioned, and the field testing unit. And the field testing unit's not a squadron watch, but it's actually the watch that we send off to a squadron or an individual when they want to start a bespoke project with us. They'll wear it for 6 months. We then get the watch back, see how the watch was worn. And then from there, we start working on a design, and then they start giving us feedback saying, stainless steel is too heavy. Could I have it in titanium? The movement broke. Could I have something a little bit more robust, like a La Jouperet movement instead of a Sellita? And we start working on every single part of the watch based off the feedback we get from the field testing unit.
So my understanding is that this testing is really not about the aesthetic preferences so much as the type of tool that they need.
Exactly. 100%.
That's very, very interesting. How long does this whole process take?
So from when they get the watch to when we get it back, it takes about 6 months. And
Okay.
I would say from when we first get the email to delivery of the watch can take 18 months to 2 years.
And I guess maybe this is, I don't know. I don't know how difficult of a question this is. Maybe it's a simple answer, but there's probably not a lot of new functionality you're adding, right? There's probably some other watch on the market that may not be the design they like, but offer all the stuff they want. What's the appeal for them to go through this process to have something bespoke to them? Is that so important to them, or is there actual functionality? They're like, we've tested a bunch of watches on the market. Nothing does exactly what we need. Help us, guys. Explain what the rationale for them is wanting something completely bespoke is.
Yeah, I mean, but generally speaking, when you're operating in a squadron, they want something that represents who they are and that connects everyone to that squadron together. So having an item that everyone across, let's say you've got 10 people, those 10 people have exactly the same item, then, they spend every day working together. That's something that's important to them because we always say it's your brother in arms. You spend more time in the army than with your own family.
So that fosters fraternity by them using the same gear?
Yes, 100%. It really does. And you'll have that aspect of it, but because they've worked on the design of it together as well, and giving us feedback, there's always a really personal element inside that watch. So in the case of the Milgraph, they wanted a GMT hand because it reminded them of what time it was at home. And, there was on their specific models, there's other hidden detail that's, that is specific to that squadron, which I can't mention unfortunately because of an NDA, but it's specific to that, squadron within itself. And I think that's the part that they really enjoy is the personalized aspect of it. It's not just another watch, it's their watch.
So it's really kind of part of their uniform.
Yes, 100%.
Interesting. And do you find that some of them have specification needs, like they do certain type of activities that requires very specialized things, or, once you have a sport watch figured out, water resistance, shock resistance, stuff like that, you basically can handle most of the use case scenarios?
I think there's always a small level of adaptability that we need to do, or flexibility per squadron and what their use is. Going back to the Milgraph is a good example. They really needed something that was incredibly resistant. So having that titanium grade 5, incredibly light watch, with the crown on the opposite side, because in their case, they used to get wrist injuries because of the crown digging in when they were out in the field. So, that in their case, there's a couple of specifications that's important to them. And that's where we have to be somewhat adaptable and flexible for.
What do they use the chronographs for?
Missions, to ensure that the same squadron's on the same time.
Okay, so they all start at the same time and they know how many hours or minutes they're into something.
Yes, 100%.
Do they actually have, in some instances, military specifications that you need to meet? Because I know that for historically in certain armies, the infantry watches, they were just sort of built to a spec, right? Brands weren't like, we think this is great. They're built to spec. Do you have, for many of these soldiers, certain types of specifications that the military requires for them to wear it during, I guess, active duty?
Yes, 100%. So how it will happen is there are certain platforms where they will put out information saying we require a watch and this is what we're looking for from a specs, design, and what have you. And then brands generally apply to try and win that contract. And generally, that's how we've mostly got all these watches done today is through those applications. So we are aware of what they're looking for. We know what's from a spec side, and then we work on the design together.
So this sounds like that sort of official government bidding process to make sure that it's sort of all fair and stuff like that. Even though this is, a watch brand, often a luxury watch brand doing it, they still have to apply as though they're a regular government supplier, right?
Yes. Except in our case, not all of the watch request comes from governments. So sometimes we get the squadrons themselves requesting it.
Oh, so they're allowed to do that?
They're allowed to do that. And they come to us directly saying, look, we're 15 people. We're like a family. We want an item that connects all of us together. And
Isn't it a bit weird, though, that some of the governments who are still looking for essentially, fancy things they wear with their uniform have to go through like a formal bidding process? That's a bit, at least, amusing to me.
I think it is, but I think at the same time, most governments know absolutely nothing about watches. And I think when they pull out what they're looking for is more for a guidance to find someone that they feel, meets their price threshold, and that they can have somewhat of an influence in the designing process of getting something that is specific for their needs.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, you said that Micromilspec shifted away from that model. Does that mean you don't do that anymore, or you supplemented that with selling, I guess, versions of some of those watches you designed for the general public?
So we're pivoting away generally from it in the sense that it will always be part of our DNA. That's what we are. But I think given the environment of the world today, I think it's important for us to pivot and become the ultimate tactical watch company rather than a military watch supplier. So we kind of want to gravitate more towards extreme sports, creating watches that are really used for specific sporting divisions. I'll give an example. Where we haven't announced it yet, but we're going into kite surfing and we've signed our first brand ambassador within that world. And the whole idea is to then create a specific watch for the pro athletes in that domain, because all of them wear a watch when they compete and when they're jumping 40 meters in the air. All of them are wearing a watch. So we're looking to pivot smartly into a similar category, just not being military. We want it to be more lifestyle orientated, if that makes sense.
That's something I'd like to ask you more about. Now, from a consumer perspective, at least a collector perspective, there's always been a big allure around military watches, whether they've been historic ones or what soldiers are wearing today. Of course, the type of durability and features and design built into them. I think you'll agree consumers like military watches. At the same time, I've noticed that a lot of brands, from a marketing perspective, and again, that's your role, shy away from anything related to war, weapons, killing. And it seems to be a little bit of a contradiction because on the one hand, the consumer, at least some consumers seem to like it, though it's challenging to spin some of the times, and you can get yourself into an argument that you can't really win, and you might have to concede the immorality of how your products are being used. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is either you embrace it, which in our case, I think we embrace our past and we don't forget about it, and we're still going to have that military tactical side of it as part of our DNA. It just won't be the only part of our DNA. I think the reason why as well brands shy away from it is when you look at the historical brands, and I put IWC in it, but IWC supplied watches to the Nazis. Yep. So like, yeah, as did a lot of other watch brands. They were hedging their bets at the time. But it's, at the end of the day, it's something, there's no such thing as a clean army. So it's something that I say to all my team, our history is our history. There's no such thing as a clean army, whether it's the British, the Americans, the Afghanis or whatever, every single army in the world has done something drastically horrible. So, who am I to be a morality checker, in that environment? The only reason why I think, though, we need to find the right balance is that in our case is when trying to create partnerships with other brands, a lot of them I've noticed started to have clauses in their contracts where they can't work with other brands that have military connections. So what becomes difficult for us is that we're trying to build a platform and trying to get to that next level. But then you end up in a situation where a lot of other brands are like, well, we want nothing to do with military. Based off of, the environment of the world, this is a big no-go for us. So we've missed out on opportunities because of the brand perception of what we have today.
That makes a lot of sense. And I guess the follow-up to that is it not actually a good thing for some brands, maybe not all brands, to be polarizing? Because I've always said it's better to have some people adore you and other people hate you than to have nobody feel anything about you at all.
Yes, 100%. I think that's what we're good at, though. I think we're very good at making people feel things. Whether it was our latest campaign, previously being Black Badger, which was a non-military campaign, but something Star Wars-y with cartoon characters and spinning on stories actual stories that happen within the watch world. I think people resonate with what we do. So even if we pivot away a little bit from it, I still think we'll have that passionate fan base, because I think people like us not just for our tool watches, but they love it because of our marketing campaigns and the humor that we put behind it.
I mean, look, people love sports watches. And I think what's interesting is when people aren't engaging in sports, they imagine themselves to be doing something when they look at that watch, right? Maybe they imagine themselves to be swimming or diving or driving or flying or beating somebody up or chasing someone down with a gun. But we know that there's a fantasy element involved. And as you said, brands need to decide which of those stories they want to be associated with. And you're right, from a marketing perspective, it can be very, very challenging to figure out a welcoming narrative with that type of thing. So it's a delicate line because, as you said, it's part of the name. Do you have conversations with consumers about this that want to know more about the military side? And you have to say, well, we're not doing that as much anymore. I just wonder, how you incorporate the heritage, as you said, where you came from without more supportive media around the name, that is on the dial.
No, totally. I think in our case, most of the questions that I have is, and the conversation, I do every single watch salon personally myself. So I have a lot of interaction with the clients directly. And I find that's
Awesome.
important
Absolutely.
because then I get direct feedback of what I need to do. My partner hates it because I'm gone 9 months of the year, but I think that's why we've been able to date for 6 years without killing each other, is that I'm never there.
It's the best data. I mean, you cannot get better information than observing people actually interacting with their watches. No metrics, no reports, nothing can replace the value of that.
100%. And I think the good side of it is every country is so different. And, when I went to New York last year, it was the first time I had direct interaction with B2C clients in America. And it was completely different from anything that I had ever experienced in my life. I saw watches, the sizes of the Empire State Building of like that thickness. And I was like, what the hell? That looks like a weapon. And it's a very interesting world, but I think it's fantastic to have those opportunities because you then come to realize through these interactions that in the case of our consumer, they love the tool watch side, but they don't really care if we communicate on that military side. They care about more the funny video that we have of one of our guys throwing a watch into the river at Geneva Watch Days last year to test if it was waterproof. They cared more about us setting the watch on fire in a forest, which we did at Geneva Watch Days, and then brought the case over with the burnt watch and made it as part of our display. It's that side that I've come to learn that they expect from us, which it's really hard to be funny the whole time. I understand stand-up comics. I cannot do it, but it's really hard being funny the whole time. But I think that's the good side of it, is that our clients and our fans love that side of us more than anything, that we're a little Norwegian company that don't take ourselves too seriously.
Now, that's a great angle within the context of an industry that has historically taken itself so very, very seriously. And this is sort of a perfect time to bring up something that I've been pondering and starting to discuss and write about, which goes into exactly what you're saying. And I call it the distinction between formal and informal luxury, right? Formal luxury takes itself seriously. Informal luxury, you can be more casual, you can mess around, you can even make jokes. And it really goes to sort of how you're wearing the watches and in what context you're wearing the watches. We're not all strapping on our dress watches and going to tuxedo events. In fact, most people will probably never do that in their life. But people will wear a nice watch while hanging out with their friends or going shopping or going on vacation or doing sports outside or playing with their kids and things like that. And they want to have fun. And it's also a hobby now. Watches aren't purchased just as social status items and rewards for yourself, but there's a community of people that make friendships and things like that. And so being able to be lighthearted and be a nice distraction is a really good thing. But at the end of the day, I think you'll have to agree that the product itself still needs to be a serious tool. Like you can have fun marketing, maybe you can have cool little, graphics and things like that. But at its core, the product needs to be of the utmost seriousness.
I'd say yes and no. I think at the end of the day, on our side, I think, yes, our products are very good, and we do take our products seriously, but I think it's the brand DNA that really concludes that purchase across the line.
What is brand DNA? Maybe define that for me.
For me, it's your brand personality, your tone of voice. It's if our brand was to talk, what would it sound like?
So that's more. So again, you could be right. That's more important than the product. People will really interesting.
For me, yes, because if you look at the Rolex lineup in terms of taking Sea Dweller, Submariner, Yachtmaster, they all look quite similar as a product in itself. They've all got a black bezel. If you put the black dial, black bezel, they all look quite similar. There's not
Sure.
much of a difference. But what makes people buy that watch is the brand DNA associated to it. It's the same product, but they're consistently always sold out.
That's a really
And
good product.
it is a very good product. It is a very good product.
I mean, that's about as serious of a watch as you could get.
It is, but it's still quite similar in the sense like the product in itself doesn't differentiate that much from category to category in terms of a design.
I agree they don't have to be original. That's true. I just meant they need to be well-made tools that are durable and tell the time well.
So that I agree from a B2B business model, which is what we do. But I think less so to a B2C, which is why you're starting to see the quartz movements coming back. And at least in Europe it is. And you see, like Furlan Marie doing a mecha quartz. You see Baltic doing a mecha quartz. These other...
I've been waiting a decade for quartz to come back. High-end quartz is what I've been lusting for almost since the beginning. And only the Japanese were doing it for a long time. Not only, but for the most part.
I will have to introduce you to a French friend of mine who is the editor of a magazine called Le Petit Poussoir in France. And he goes to every single watch fair with a cap with "Make Quartz Great Again."
Really?
Yeah.
I haven't run into that guy. That's great.
I will introduce him to him at Watches and Wonders, but he's always going out with this cap of saying "Make Quartz, great again." And he was like, "What's surprising is the amount of people I've been with him, and the amount of like other journalists or whatever who come up and like physically start getting into." I'm like, Jesus Christ, this is not like a Republican Democrat like political debate here. This is this guy talking about wanting quartz watches back into the market, and even people want to get into a debate with him and like get heated. And I'm like, what the hell? Who would have thought a cap could create so much hatred?
A lot of people don't like quartz for bad reasons. Okay, so how much quartz is in the Micromilspec collection now?
None.
You hater.
None. Yeah. We make serious watches, Ariel.
Okay, serious mechanical watches.
Yeah, there you go. It's part of what we're talking about.
Now, part of your job, a big part of your job is to not only get people's attention, but keep their attention. You're working within, what I call the internet first era, where people might need to see the watches at some point to buy it, but they're more likely than not learning about it on the internet and probably being educated about it during the internet. What are some of the major challenges as this becomes, I think part of what you're talking about, you said the personality of the brand is more important. What I get from that is that half, if not more than half of the effort you're doing is into the marketing, into the communication, things like that. Talk about how the marketing role these days is just as important as the product role, where historically, talking about some of the legacy brands, for them it was like 90% product and then a little bit squeeze in marketing here or there. Now, especially with the new brands that are being built in this era, the communication, marketing, image role, the DNA role, as you said, the personality role is taking up 50% or more of the effort. And talk about that as a contrast to the old way of doing things.
Yeah, I think it's even more. In my case, I think, marketing communications probably takes 70 to 80% of my time.
Interesting.
If you take events and everything out of the picture, I spend most of my time trying to figure out what we can do in the next 2 to 3 years from a marketing perspective. Number one, to get noticed. Where do we need to go? Who do we need to work with? What can we do on the limited budget that we have? And that's the constant wrestling that I have inside my brain is, and how much money can I steal away from Henrik for my marketing department? Because that's my job, is to fight to get as much money as I can off the CEO to then invest that to make sure our numbers get better. So I would say most of my time is spent on, comms and finance in terms of trying to fight for my department. But now, you're right. I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry. No, please, after you.
No, I think it's just interesting because historically the marketing was paid for by entities that don't really exist anymore. So you had regional distributors, retailers, entities like that who were in fact doing the advertising for a particular region. The brands often didn't have too much to do with it. And then when they inherited all that responsibility, they were like, oh no, we're not going to pay for that. and no one ended up doing it. And so you had this long protracted era of brands having almost no marketing and riding on really retailers who they were hoping would do all the work for them in store. Then watch media became a thing, and that changed the dynamic. Now, brands that are new are often not incredibly well funded or on a shoestring budget or just bootstrapped, which is a common entrepreneurial issue. And they find that they have to do a lot more than just make watches. They have to spend a lot of money making watches. It's complicated to be a startup, right? It looks very maybe glamorous from the outside, but talk about some of the realities of being in a brand. Now you're not just new from yesterday, but you're still a relatively new brand. Talk about some of the practical realities of starting a brand from the ground up.
I think the difficulty when you're in our position is, especially as we've been just selling to the public for the last 12 to 18 months, is how do you get noticed and how do you get people to, take you seriously and have confidence in your product? Because all of those things need to be, for someone to purchase a watch, all of those things need to be lined up. Confidence, associate with the brand DNA and like the product, and then have the finances to be able to pull it off. So you need 4 things to really go for it. And I think that's the biggest difficulty is, I think I was well on a shoestring budget, but I think that's the best side of it because it's kind of what I'm a big football fan, and what I find interesting is I remember a sentence the CEO of the football club I support said, because we had a transfer embargo, so we weren't allowed to pay for any players. And, when he was dealing with the media, he said, this is a great opportunity for us because this is the moment where we have to be as creative as possible to identify people in the most obscure markets that are willing to come for free. And I kind of take that sentence and I apply that to watches, because having all these constraints, which most of it is just general awareness and budget, the whole time, it just means I need to be as creative as possible. And if I end up spending £1, it needs to be £1 where I nail a knockout punch, and that we, get some things going and rolling. And I think that's where it's been a good learning curve for the past 18 months, because at the end of the day, when I started at Micromilspec, I was 35. At 35, you're confident, you can be naive, you don't know everything yet. I'm not a genius, I'm not Steve Jobs. And I think going from IWC to Micromilspec, a lot of the decisions that I've been putting in place for the past 18 months has been things that also personally to me has been building my confidence up to then become even more creative and then more assertive. And I think it's been a kind of perfect relationship between Micromilspec and myself, because we're both slowly gaining confidence as the months roll by. And we kind of both piggyback off each other to, make sure that we throw a bloody good punch when we come to America in October.
Talk about how competitive the space is. There used to be gaps in the market, like, there isn't a good watch at this price range. But now, there's a lot of different types of watches. There's a lot of different price ranges, high and low. Consumers can easily confused or simply never learn about you. How difficult is it to get noticed, and how competitive is the space in your opinion?
I don't think it's that difficult to get noticed, because I think most other brands are very predictable into what they're going to do. At least I have a good gut feeling of, I know 95% of the time what brands are going to do. So it makes my job easier to then be able to stand out from a branding perspective next to all of them. I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question? So
basically just, we talked about how much time you spent on communication, getting awareness. Yes. And that's, of course, strategy, content creation, posting on stuff. You said you have a very small budget, so you have to make sure that you make right decisions. But even after all that is said and done, there's still other people doing the same thing. Yes. And the question is, how many other brands are out there trying to solve problems and get attention to compete with the eyeballs that you also want to reach?
Absolutely. Sorry. Now I remember. So I think there's 2 things. There is still gaps in the market. I think we spoke about this in our last chat offline. When Henrik spotted the price gap opportunity between, and I'll speak in pounds, and hopefully it'll make sense in dollars, because I can't remember the conversion 100%. It's changed a lot, but it was roughly between the £1,300 to £2,900. So I think that's roughly $1,800 up to $4,000, if my conversion is correct. And for him, what he found interesting was the price point for good complications. So for him, he's focusing a lot on chronographs, But, when you look at the Milgraph that has a GMT, a chronograph, and all these other elements to it, he thinks there's a very good opportunity from where Bremont used to be in that price category, but have since vacated that there's not been another brand to come into that market within those same price points. And I think, that being one element, and then, as I was mentioning before, the brand DNA element in terms of being able to understand and predicting what other people are going to do makes my job a lot easier, because I think it's very easy to stand out next to all these other brands who end up playing it safe and who are too stale in their communication strategy.
You mentioned Bremont, and you also, it's from your country, right? I have to ask your opinion as a marketing professional. What, in your opinion, did they do incorrectly over the last couple of years? They admittedly did a bunch of stuff wrong on a bunch of different levels. How would you articulate some of the things that Bremont has done wrong? A brand that I've historically loved, difficult for me to wrap my mind around right now. But I think, again, from just a marketing perspective, forget product, they made some huge mistakes. And I think someone like yourself can probably well articulate them.
I think it's several things. If I take the whole of, what Bremont has been doing the last couple of years, I think a lot of it has been trying to do too much, as one of my favorite songs goes from Airborne, too much, too fast. Generally with a consumer, you need to take them on a journey and put small incremental changes little by little throughout the years to then move them in the direction of where you want them to go eventually. And I think Bremont just went, screw that. We're just going to do everything now. We're going to put a new logo, bam, 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 all these new products here, blah, 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 and just flooded everything at the same time. And then suddenly all the press and the people who love Bremont was like, whoa, what the hell is going on? This is like nothing of what we've come to know and expect from like the last couple of years.
It's like, we just started liking you last week. What happened?
Yeah, but what's going on here? And I think that's what's happened. They just threw too much change at the same time.
What were they trying to gain? Why did they feel that any of that was even necessary?
I think, you know what? I don't even, from that perspective, I'm totally bamboozled and confused as to why they would do that. I think the two original founders probably knew they were on their way out, and with the new investment firm coming in. I think you're starting to see Davide putting his stamp on it, on the brand a little bit more, through the colored dials. I think I saw they did a pink dial recently, and I was like, that's very Italian. In my mind, I was like, that's typically Italian. And I think you're starting to see him to put his, putting his mark on it. I think as well with him, he'll need time for us to then be able to generally see what is the lay of the land of Bremont. I can't throw criticism at him too much because he's kind of coming halfway through trying to fight fires and get everything up and running based off all the bloody changes that they've done. But I think he should be judged in like 3-4 years based off where the brand is.
I just think that's such an interesting scenario because usually this industry is accused of doing too little. And he did too much.
Yes.
And, I think that you're spot on when it comes to the speed, where it was like overnight, boom, new logo, new products, like what's going on here? Like roll all that stuff out real slow, really, really slow. And at the same time, it didn't seem like he was solving a problem that was broken.
No.
The company had spent all this time and effort convincing people to like a particular story that, yes, could have been tweaked here and there. Absolutely. Obviously with new, if the original brothers are out, you have to figure out a new sort of figurehead. But the logo was fine. The core designs, no one said that Bremonts were ugly, right?
Nope.
That was not a complaint.
Nope.
So, and he added some ugly.
Yep. I think he tried to do a George Kern, to be honest. He did a Breitling. He came in, new logo, new models, blah, blah. Not all of them were successful. I remember the first couple of years when George came into Breitling, some of the watches released was god awful. It's only maybe now where there's a little bit more consistency in terms of knowing what to expect. But at the beginning, you're like, what the hell is he doing? Like, Jesus. And I think Bremont has kind of copied that in a certain way.
We're almost out of time, or we are out of time, but I just wanted to know what's going on with Micromilspec in regards to people listening to this. It'll be a few weeks down the road from now. What should they look out for? You're not on the 12-month cycle, so that's good. But
No.
if they're paying attention to the brand, what is it you want them to see?
Honestly, what I want them to see is the fun content that we create. At the end of the day, that's what I care about more than our products, because I think that's what people want to see on top of a very, sexy, cool product that goes behind it. But most importantly, my biggest argument I had consistently the whole time with IWC is that you have a better experience buying a night in a 5-star hotel at 500 quid than buying a 25,000 IWC watch in their boutique. And I really want people, when they come and buy a watch with Micromilspec, that they feel part of something, that they remember it as a good experience, that they like the brand DNA, that they like the people who are behind these offices that come to their country, to these watch salons, who engage with them everywhere that I go. Every time I do a watch salon, I literally open our CRM data sheet and I email everyone that's purchased the watch saying, hey, if you want to have a drink, I'm here. And I want to keep up that level of personality and that close interaction that they have with me or the CEO, because I think all of that's really important. At the end of the day, people like you and me love watches, and we like to feel a part of something, not alienated because of our class system or how much we earn or all of these other things.
Theodore, where can people learn more about Micromilspec on the internet?
You can come and join us at micromilspec.com. And we're on Instagram.
Definitely got to check those out. This has been the Superlative Podcast interview with the Chief Marketing Officer of Micromilspec, Theodore de Turckheim. Theodore, thank you so much.
Thank you for getting my name right again.